Hey, I'm Nate. Thanks for checking out another talk on how to become a better speaker. Today, we're actually going to talk about how to build a talk, and I'm going to give you 10 fundamental steps to creating a great talk. All right, so here we go. How to build a talk. First of all, we have to remember that public speaking is a service to your audience. Man, it's about serving them by improving their lives. In other words, you're adding value to their life with what you have to say. So you need to use your basic communication tools well. We've talked about those before, but how do you actually put a talk together? That's what we're going to discuss today. And I used to get this so wrong. I used to just want to show up with an audience and get the audience to recognize how brilliant that I am. So I would load my talk with a ton of information, but very little else. And that was self-serving. I was serving my own ego when I communicated that way. But to build a talk that adds value and serves the audience, there's a pretty specific progression you can use. There's some simple steps for research and writing and thinking. There's 10 of them, in fact, and we're going to cover all 10 of them today. So how do you build a talk? Really quickly, here's the 10 steps, the TLDR. Acknowledge the audience, pick your topic, identify the purpose, craft a through line, get to the point, support your purpose, design the flow, write your outline, show, don't tell, and then practice obsessively. So let's get going. Number one, you have to acknowledge the audience. Like, you need to know who you're talking to. Consider who is in your audience. Man, how will their interests and needs and opinions influence their response to what you have to say? You need to consider how they're going to respond to the topic that you come up with, to you as the speaker, to whatever the occasion might be. All of those things influence how an audience receives your message. If you're in a big room, if you're in a small room, is there audio equipment? Are you delivering it through video like we're doing right now? Like, what is the audience? Who's the audience? And what is the setting you're speaking in? All of those things will influence that. We used to call this analyzing the audience or doing an audience analysis, and there's many different ways that people have done this through the years. I mean, some even go so far as to do surveys and intense research as to who's in their audience and what kind of values they have and that kind of thing. But basically, when you're acknowledging the audience, you're just learning about your audience's attributes and motivations and why they're there to listen to you. That'll go a long, long way toward helping you build a talk that'll really add value to their life. And that's the controlling idea. The big question we always want to be asking is, how can my speech serve this audience? So we start by acknowledging who that audience is. And then the second step, or the second way that we build a talk, is by picking our topic. Once we know who the audience is, then we can begin to pick our topic. We consider the occasion and the reason as we're, identifying who is out there. We need to think about what topics are going to be suitable to that audience's needs and values in this particular circumstance. What is a topic that will add value to their lives? And can I speak as a communicator on this topic in a way that serves my acknowledged audience? This is a big deal. In other words, you wouldn't show up to a kindergarten class and talk about thermodynamics. It just, not in the normal language. I couldn't talk about that anyways. I barely know how to say the word. But you're going to pick a topic based on the audience you speak to, okay? So we're going to acknowledge the audience. We're going to pick our topic. And then number 3, we need to identify the purpose. Like, why are you speaking to this audience? What's the point? What's the purpose? What are you trying to really accomplish here? What do you want your speech to do? You got to start with the why behind why you're giving this talk. Now, old school academia and speech theory used to basically say that you would direct your speech towards one of 3 general purposes or goals. And those old school speech purposes or goals, which are still in play, but I believe they've shifted a little bit. We'll talk about that some more in a second. Those 3 old school speech purposes or goals would be, number 1, to inform. Basically, you're educating your audience about something. Number 2, to mark a special occasion where you're honoring someone or something. You think like a toast at a wedding or a retirement party or something along those lines. And then finally, number 3 would be to persuade. It's where you're influencing and you're inspiring, you're encouraging an audience for action. Those goals are all still very much real, but I 100% believe, based on 20 years of communication experience, that one of them is dominant in importance. Okay? As you're identifying the purpose of your speech, you might be educating someone on something. You might be honoring a moment or a person or a place or something like that. But every talk, all good speaking, like I cannot overemphasize this, all good speaking is an exercise in audience persuasion. It doesn't matter what you're talking about or who you're talking about it to. You have to convince them and get them on board with who you are as a communicator. So you're identifying the purpose behind your speech, but you also need to acknowledge that no matter what you're trying to do, there's going to be an incredibly strong level of persuasion involved. So when you're identifying this speech purpose, you're answering a specific question. Like, what do I want the audience to learn or do as a result of this talk? And the answer to that question is your speech's purpose. Answer the question and you know your purpose. So we acknowledge our audience. We're going to select or pick a topic, and then we're going to identify our purpose. And number 4 in this how to build a talk progression is we're going to craft what's called a through line. A through line is just a statement that clearly expresses the central idea of your speech. In other words, it concisely identifies to your audience in a single statement or sentence what your speech is about. Sometimes it's just a few words. And your through line operates as what we call a controlling idea. In other words, as you're creating content, gathering supporting material, and doing all these things to craft your speech down the road, that through line is your controlling idea. Anything that doesn't connect to the through line, you don't include it in your speech. This will make you have a lot of strong cohesion in your talk. It'll be easier to follow, easier to pay attention to, and easier for you to accomplish your big goal as a communicator. There's nothing worse than listening to a speaker who's all over the place, and you'll serve your audience really well when you stick to one controlling idea, your through line. And here's an example through line for you. If I was going to give a speech and the purpose behind the speech was to encourage students to stay out of debt, I might choose a through line like this. Buying something you can't afford might open doors now, but it will close doors later. And then that through line would control everything else that I put in the speech. Now, you might get a few days down the road in crafting this speech and realize that your through line is inadequate. You might have to double back and recreate it or tweak it. All of this is a progression. You're continually tweaking and editing and making things better. And before we move on to the next step, let me give you a practical tip right here involving these last 2 that we talked about. Keep your speech goals in sight. Like literally, write your speech purpose on a sticky note, place it on the edge of your computer screen, write your through line down as well right there, and keep them in sight and let them be the driving creative force behind your content. It'll just help so much. Okay, number 5 in these steps, get to the point. Your points. You got to have something to say, some point, some way to organize this speech. You want to get to the point, and you want to organize your talk usually around 2 or 3 main points. I would challenge you big time and say the shorter the talk, the fewer the points. In fact, I love a great talk that just has 1 point. They're usually a lot more memorable. But your points, they're your primary pieces of information or your primary pieces of knowledge, if your speech is pretty informative in nature. If it's a persuasive talk, as I believe most are, really, it's your key claims that you're making. For example, today, I'm trying to persuade you to believe that these 10 steps will help you be a great communicator. 10 is probably too many. But here's some example main points for the through line that I just gave you. Remember, that through line was buying something you can't afford might open doors now, but it will close doors later. Well, here's 3 example points for a through line like that. Point number 1 could be consumer debt is a massive industry that does not exist to serve you. Point number 2 could be your income is your opportunity. And then point number 3 would be pay cash now so you can afford better opportunities later. Your main points, they're just going to drive your through line home. All right, help them connect with the audience. So you need a through line. And then number 6, support your purpose. Support your purpose. You're going to illustrate those main points that you just created with supporting material that clarifies and elaborates and verifies your ideas. It could be statistics. It might be stories that you tell. It could be stuff from your personal experiences. Any and every kind of conceivable, reputable external source is on the table. This is where we use that old word that intimidates the heck out of some people: research. You got to research. There's so much information available to us anymore. It really is a shame to try to give a talk and not have researched it thoroughly. So support your purpose by building the most credible and incredible talk you can. Support that purpose. Provide evidence for your assertions. Lend credibility to your message. Support your purpose. Number 7 in the order of these steps today is design the flow. Design the flow. Man, every speech, every talk, it has an introduction, a body, and a conclusion. And you have to design that. You want to articulate these 3 sections well so you can really nail what it is you're trying to say. This is kind of a redundant way to put it, but I heard a communicator say one time that this is how a speech works. You tell the audience what you're going to tell them, and then you tell them, and then you tell them what you told them. And it sounds so ridiculous, but it's so true. In the introduction to your speech, you're gaining your audience's attention and their interest by introducing some kind of hook, the topic, the purpose, all of that kind of stuff. It's gathered around your through line, but ultimately the introduction serves to connect you to your audience and to tell them what you're about to tell them. And then in the body, the bulk of your talk, this contains your main points. It contains any subpoints, all your gathered information and data. This is where you really make your case. You're telling your audience what you had planned to tell them. And then, of course, in the conclusion, you're restating that through line. Maybe you're mixing it up just a little bit, or you're summarizing what you've kind of said throughout your talk. In other words, in the conclusion, you're telling the audience, again, what you've told them. It just reiterates how your main points confirm that controlling idea to begin with. So get yourself a flow, an introduction, a body, and conclusion. A lot of the time, I'll write my introduction, what I think my introduction will be, and then I'll write the entire body of my speech, and then I'll write the conclusion, and then I just go back and probably change both the introduction and the conclusion. I know when I write those, they're just placeholders to get my mind working and get me a little further down the trail when it comes to these steps, all right? So number 7 is design the flow. Every good talk flows well. Number 8, write your outline. Okay, you've been gathering things, you've been thinking about things, you've probably been writing things and just dumping them into like a Word document. But now, number 8, near the end of the process, is where you actually begin to craft an outline that you feel comfortable communicating from. An outline is just a plan for arranging the elements of your talk in support of your through line. So this is where the writing process, it just really begins to take shape. It's now becoming an actual talk. I recommend doing this. I recommend writing a manuscript at first. Literally write word for word what you plan to say. And then after you've done that from beginning to end, you've written the whole thing, go and practice it a few times. See how it feels, edit it and edit it and edit it some more. And once you've done that, then take that manuscript and simplify it to make it even easier to speak from when you're finally in front of your audience. Okay? So number 8 is write your outline. Every good talk has a great outline. Number 9, Show, don't tell. Audiences don't like to be told things. That includes me and you. And words are very important. They're critical. We have to have words and choose words that win as a communicator. But are words enough? Well, not usually. I mean, you're watching this on YouTube, for crying out loud. There's a reason why we go to YouTube for information anymore. We like to be shown things and not just told things. So as a communicator, what audiovisual aid can you come up with that might help the audience understand your main points even better? There's different kinds of people who learn different ways, and many of them need to be shown rather than told. Is there some kind of interactive element that you can use to demonstrate the point you're trying to get across? One of the greatest examples of this I've ever heard was a guy who was speaking to a large audience, I believe in New Jersey. He was talking about the condition of the human heart. And so while he spoke for about an hour, behind him on the stage, he had a pedestal, and on top of this pedestal was a solid block of ice, and inside that block of ice was a great big animal heart. Gruesome, right? True story. As he talked about the condition of the human heart, this ice block began to melt. And so by the end of his talk, all that was left was this gross, bloody heart sitting on a pedestal. That's extreme, but it worked. I bet nobody ever forgot that talk. Why? Because he didn't just tell the audience, he showed them. How can you show and tell? You can do it, and you have a message worth doing it for. So don't forget, number 9 is show, don't tell. And then finally, number 10, practice obsessively. Practice, 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 and practice some more. Look, preparation and practice, they're necessary for your success. They're critical, they're vital. If you want to both feel and appear natural to your listeners, which should be one of your goals, you have to learn to achieve natural delivery by rehearsing both the nonverbal and verbal elements of your content. A good speech, a good rule of thumb for good speaking is to practice at least 6 times. The longer you work and get reps in as a communicator, maybe the less you'll need to practice, but you cannot, and I cannot overemphasize the importance of practicing. I like to say you should practice your speech until you can deliver it artfully. In other words, practice, 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 and just at the point where you are sick of practicing, practice it one more time. And then you've probably got a great handle on it. Your audience will thank you for it. You'll be more confident. You'll be less nervous, and you'll ace it. I think you should do it because you have a message worth sharing. Okay? So let's recap. There were 10 steps to this progression on how to build a great talk. The first one, simply acknowledge your audience. The second one, you pick your topic, and then you identify the purpose for your talk. Finally, you craft a through line, the controlling idea that pulls it all together. And after you have that through line, then you get to the point. You design how you're going to break this idea down into some other points. And once you have those points, you begin to support your purpose by backing up your points with information, examples, and the things that verify your credible nature of your talk. Finally, you're going to design the flow, an introduction, a body, and a conclusion that ties it all together and communicates it well and helps the audience follow along. And then you're going to write a killer outline that's easy for you to speak from. You're going to think through, how can I show my audience rather than just tell them the information. And then finally, you're going to practice, 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 and practice some more. You're going to practice obsessively. So that's it. These are the 10 steps to how to build a great talk. Let's do it. You got a message worth sharing. Thanks for watching.